Someone once said, writing is easy. You just sit at the typewriter and bleed. And this quote exists in a number of forms and has been attributed to numerous writers, including Hemingway, although there's no evidence that he said it. But I think it gets repeated all the time for one reason. It's true, at least some of the time. And it's particularly true of plotting, which I think can be fiendishly difficult. So in this video, I want to give you a rather special technique to make plotting a whole lot easier. I could be wrong, but I don't think I've ever seen it mentioned in creative writing textbooks, but all the pros use it. Indeed, when I mentioned it to a writer at a party recently, he said, "Of course we do that, but for heaven's sake, don't tell them." So I will share it with you at considerable personal risk. So welcome to another installment in my series on how to write your novel using that most unlikely of writing implements, a round Oxford bus ticket. For inspiration, I've taken the bus down to this place, Magpie Lane in Oxford. In medieval times, it had a much cruder name. It was called Grope Lane, because this was a street where love was for sale. And this, I believe, or hereabouts, is where Chaucer set the Miller's Tale from, the Canterbury Tales. And I'm going to use the Miller's Tale as a basis for showing you my technique. But I need to warn you, the Miller's Tale is lewd and bawdy and contains some gutter humour about people breaking wind. Some people might find it offensive, so if you're one of those people, maybe you should skip this video. Now, I will point out that my technique does not work for every type of plot, but it works in a lot of cases, and once you understand it, you'll find yourself noticing it everywhere. But first, let's find out what the problem is. Why is plotting so difficult? Well, it's because although you know how your story begins and ends, there is a huge expanse of empty white paper that you need to fill in between, and it isn't obvious how you do it. So you stare at the empty page and your brain melts. For an example of what I mean, take the movie The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy is blown away by a freak tornado and lands in the realm of Oz. She wants to get back to canvas. But that's how it ends. But how do we do it? How do we show that? What does she do? Or take The Lord of the Rings. The story requires two hobbits to defeat the Dark Lord Sauron. But how on earth can they do that? They do it using my special technique. Now, to illustrate my special technique, I'm going to invent my own story, a demonstration novel. It's a science fiction story about an alien called Squeeple who lives on a remote planet orbiting the star Sheckley 4. Squeeple spends his nights dreaming of Earth and its famous literature, which is celebrated throughout the universe as the best there is. And on Squeeple's planet, it is possible to take a holiday to Earth, not just as an ordinary tourist, but as one who uses a special machine called the turnip, which stands for Temporal and Universal Relativity Narrative Integration Pod. And he uses it to appear as a character in a piece of Earth fiction. So he saves up his money and buys a holiday as a character in the Canterbury Tales. It was only a bit part because he couldn't afford something cool like the Knight or the Wife of Bath. He will star as Absalom, the parish clerk in the Miller's Tale. So he climbs into his time and quantum matter thingy and travels to Oxford and arrives as Absalom. Now, the Miller's Tale features a carpenter called John and his much younger wife, Alison, together with a student lodger, Nicholas, and Absalom, who is Squeeple. Now, when John goes away on business, Nicholas, the lodger, grabs Alison by what people in the 14th century called the quaint, and suggested they make love, which is what they do, whereupon Absalom, the parish clerk, who is Squeeple, and who lusts after Alison, turns up at a window and asks for a kiss. Well, it's very dark. There are no streetlights in those days. So for a joke, Alison sticks her bare backside out, and Squeeple kisses that. Then Nicholas sticks his bare bottom out too, and when Squeeple goes to kiss it, he breaks wind, and does so, according to Chaucer, with such force that it almost blinds Absalom. This Nicholas anon flee afart, as great as it had been a thunder dent, that with the stroke he almost was blent. Oh, poor old Squeeple. It's not much of an introduction to his holiday on Earth, is it? So in distress he returns to the turnip, but it's gone. I should point out that when not being used, the turnip adopts the appearance of a sack of wheat in order to not attract attention. So here's the problem. You, the author, want to get him back to Sheckley 4, but how are you going to do it? You stare bleakly at the white paper and have no idea. Does this sound familiar? Let's see how they did it in The Wizard of Oz. How does Dorothy get back to Kansas? Well, she undertakes a journey to find the Wizard of Oz, who can fix it for her. So the whole movie is about her travelling to the lair of the wizard.
I know we're not in Kansas.
And when she gets there, she is told all she has to do to get home is to bang her specials red slippers together and say, "There's no place like home." Well, it's a bit of a cheat, isn't it, really? But the thing is, no one notices. If you make the story sufficiently compelling, the readers won't care. And how about The Lord of the Rings? Tolkien solves the problem by writing into the metaphysical fabric of the world that the Dark Lord will fall if someone throws a ring into a volcano. And then for the next 1,500 pages we see Frodo and Sam taking the most circuitous route to the volcano imaginable. The story is about all the orcs and dwarves and elves they meet on the way. The trick is to take the big, seemingly impossible story and reframe it as a much simpler story with easily achievable steps. When you think of it like that, suddenly all sorts of storytelling possibilities occur. Let's return to Squeeple. We find him lost and wandering the streets of Oxford, crying bitterly. Now I want to add a refinement. Back home on Sheckley 4 he has a sweetheart called Cressida, who also loves Earth literature, and she agreed to be his wife if he brought her back a rose from one of Chaucer's tales. So he wanders the streets in distress because he thinks he'll never see Cressida again. And a little girl takes pity on him and takes him back to her grandfather, who just happens to be an alchemist. As Squeeple explains his plight and draws a picture of where he left the turnip. And here's the magic. Wherever he left it will give us a story. And remember, it is disguised as a sack of wheat. So imagine, for example, the sack of wheat had been taken by some plague doctors, and Squeeple ends up travelling through 14th century England, afflicted by the Black Death. Or perhaps the sack of wheat has been loaded onto a ship bound for North Africa. So off he goes and ends up in a tale taken from the Arabian Nights. He could get taken prisoner, become a slave in the palace of Scheherazade, meet Ali Baba and Aladdin, and then at the end of the story he finds the turnip and travels home. Or how about a third, even more interesting possibility? I'll tell you about that after this short commercial break.
I stand amid the roar of a surf-tormented shore, and I hold within my hand grains of the golden sand. How few, yet how they creep through my fingers to the deep, while I weep, while I weep. O God, can I not grasp them with a tighter clasp? O God, can I not save one from the pitiless wave? Is all that we see or seem but a dream within a dream? Do you find yourself sometimes bewildered by the mysterious, ineffable suchness of being? Well, if you do, you need to put it in a novel. Get hold of Gateway to Narnia, my free 10-part email course on how to write your novel. Gateway to Narnia. The link is in the description below.
So let's imagine that grandfather the alchemist tells Squeeple the problem is he is trapped in the wrong genre. No one in the 14th century poetry world knows how to travel to distant stars. He needs to jump ship to a late 20th century science fiction novel. From there he should be able to get a ship going back to Sheckley 4 quite easily. And it just so happens he's been working on a special magic potion that facilitates this, and he gives it to Squeeple. And Squeeple takes a drink. Well, it's still a prototype, so it's not perfect. And instead of arriving in a science fiction novel, he arrives in one about pirates. And he notices someone is following him. So he takes another drink and ends up in a 1940s pulp fiction novel. But his pursuer is there too. So he passes through numerous genres trying to escape the dark hooded figure following him. Well, I don't know about you, but I think it could be great fun. Squeeple travelling through numerous genres, meeting Al Capone or Philip Marlowe or King Arthur. And eventually he ends up in the great medieval love story, Tristan and Isolde, where he waylays his pursuer. And what do you know? It's Cressida. She couldn't live without him, so she's followed him. And he's overjoyed. They take up abode in a medieval castle next to the sea in Cornwall, hopelessly in love, living eternally as Tristan and Isolde. Indeed, they are so happy and deeply in love that they take the magic potion, which is their ticket back to Checkley 4, and pour it into the sea. And if you'd like to be stuck in the same genre for the rest of your life, don't forget to grab Gateway to Narnia.